launched a tech company. Pop Suki was flying out of control with Lady Gaga, Beyonce, every single person in the world wearing Pop Suki bags. And at the same time, probably managing my own mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So it's been a full-on decade.
Wow.
And now
I'm surprised we've got you on this podcast. Welcome to Happy Millionaire, a show about how to make profit with a positive impact and stay happy along the way.
So Poppy Jamie's been on my podcast. She's an entrepreneur. She's a media expert. She's been a TV presenter. She's done multiple different exciting goods, jewelry, Pop Suki, and she's also starting something new. But the one thing that I really wanted Poppy to come and share with us today are her techniques and tactics for combining happiness with the entrepreneurial journey that I think she does so well and so vulnerably as well on her podcast. So
I'm excited.
Yeah. Why don't you give us a sort of like a TLDR of like the arc of your career and how that all started?
So I started TV presenting when I was 19 years old, and I was the youngest entertainment reporter at ITN. And it was an insane early 20s, late teens. Every single person on the showbiz circuit, I would interview them, and I would be the high-pitched, hyperactive reporter, and everything would go wrong. Everybody would say I was Bridget Jones, and it was sadly quite true. Despite how hard I tried, despite how much preparation I would give, it would always, and I'm not sure if I can swear, slightly fuck up. And so there was this one interview, and it was my first big one, and I'd only been asked to interview people that nobody really wanted to interview, which was, somebody who left Big Brother 5 years ago. Yeah. And anyway, finally, this was a goodie, Jude Law.
Oh, Jude Law.
Wow.
Massive.
Did he still have hair at this point?
I don't remember. I just remember him being very good looking.
He is super good looking. Honestly, I can appreciate the male form, and Jude Law, amazing. Yeah.
Phenomenal. So and it was funny because somebody brought this interview up to me 3 days ago, and I went to go to YouTube to watch the video, and I couldn't believe it was a decade ago. So 10 years ago, there I am walking into this interview with Jude Law, and I'm so overexcited. I'm, oh my God, it's just so good to meet you. He thinks I'm a competition winner. I'm that excited. And so I have to kind of, no, I'm here for ITV. Honestly, I promise you I'm like reputable. And anyway, shaking his hand furiously, and I go to sit back down on my chair, and I completely miss the seat.
No.
Oh my God.
And I go flying. And I'm lying on the floor, and I'm wearing this tiny mini skirt, trying to kind of, look professional, obviously clearly unprofessional, and half a butt cheek is out. I mean, just the whole thing is just absolutely mortifying. The cameramen are shaking with laughter. The PR can't get her breath. And I have to try and continue to do this interview while in my head, I'm like, you've just got fired. You've just got fired. You've just got fired. You've just got fired. And I thought, well, there's only two things I can do right now. I can cry, or I can just laugh because this is a disaster. And I get hysterical giggles, and when I get them, there's no end to it. So I start getting the hysterical giggles, and I'm trying to get this interview out, and it doesn't. Anyway, it becomes a viral interview. Suddenly, every single person I possibly know has seen Poppy's fail in front of Jude Law. And, people came up to me on the street. It was like, oh my God, you're the girl that fell off the chair in front of Jude Law. And I'm like, oh God, like is this what I'm going to be known for forever? So embarrassing. So I decided to move to America because that clearly sounds like the logical next step. And while I was in LA, long story short, launched the first TV show on Snapchat, which was pretty much the only TV show you could watch on Snapchat on a Saturday. And so we had millions of people watching it because they were really, at the time, Evan and the team, they were very small at Snapchat. This is when they probably had two rooms, one being on Venice Beach and another one. And, I remember meeting Evan on my first day, and it was they were just testing. Snapchat were like, does television shows work on the app? Anyway, it exploded the show. This led me to then realizing how many people were suffering from stress and anxiety, because I used to get thousands upon thousands of messages from people watching the show just saying, I'm feeling really stressed, I'm feeling really anxious. And this led me to think, what do you do if you're stressed and anxious back in 2014? Where do you go? There was nowhere to go. There was no help. There was no conversation about it. Nobody was talking about it at the dinner table. Certainly nobody was talking about it in the press about the kind of mental health epidemic that we were in. And it goes back to my mum. I thought, well, my mum's a psychotherapist. Could I put my mum in an app? I remember being told the most successful apps were the ones that behaved like parents. Uber could take you to school. Postmates or Deliveroo can bring you food. And so if you look at all these, ones that we kind of go to most, and I thought, but who looks after your emotional health? Who looks after you like a parent does and says, let's talk about your stress? And so that's what Happy
What
Not
year was
Perfect.
this then? What year was this?
This is 2015,
Oh, wow.
2014.
So this is really
Yeah,
early in
super early.
like the mental health
Yeah.
movement.
We
This
were
is very
one of
early.
the first apps to ever gamify mental health. I remember emailing Michael Acton Smith, and I sent him this email the other day. I emailed him, I think, in 2014, because at the time I thought, well, I looked at what else is there, and Calm was tiny, tiny, tiny.
Yeah,
it was
it's
just
very small.
one meditation a day. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, I love meditating, so maybe I'll go and work with Calm. And then I ended up being like, let's just create this in a slightly different way. And that was Happy Not Perfect. And so I grew Happy Not Perfect from 2015, had to persuade investors that mental health was a thing, had to persuade it was exhausting. It was 3 years of saying, this is important, this is important.
Yeah. No one believed in it.
Nobody believed in
Yeah.
it. And if anything, people didn't want to talk about it. I had investors say, can we just change the words on your deck? You take out mental health. It's a bit scary. Can we call that happiness? And so finally raised the money, built my tech team, and we launched in 2018, and then suddenly the world changed. It was overnight. This became a conversation, and wrote the book. And then in between that, I set up a fashion company called Pop Suki with my best friend, Suki Waterhouse. I mean, Pop Suki was sold in, oh my God, must be like 12 different countries.
Wow.
Net-a-Porter, we launched in China. We took over an entire Shanghai shopping mall. I mean, my life in 2018 was so mental. I launched a tech company. Pop Suki was flying out of control with Lady Gaga, Beyonce, every single person in the world wearing Pop Suki bags. And at the same time, probably managing my own mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So it's been a full-on decade.
Wow.
And now
I'm surprised we've got you on this podcast.
I'm just trying to imagine like you going to pitch to investors with your current career, you're a non-tech founder, you have an idea that's in a niche that no one's even really talking about. How on earth did you convince early people to invest in you as a founder and also generate the team itself?
Great question. I actually posted this when I was announcing the acquisition. I posted my first deck,
Oh, so
and it was so basic. I really noticed within a year and a half how much that deck evolved. So if for anyone writing their first decks, be kind to yourself and know that it is a constant, iteratable journey, if that's a word. But I remember going home. I was living in LA, so I flew back to London, and I lived with my brother at the time. And it was 10 p.m. at night, but he always goes to bed at 9 p.m. Always has. Very odd. And so I remember kind of going into his room to wake him up, because this idea was, and I think you've got to be that passionate about the idea that you are willing to wake up your brother who likes to go to bed at 9 and you're willing to wake him up at 10 just to tell him. But I became obsessed. And that's what I do with all my businesses. Becomes a complete obsession that gives me so much joy to think about. And I'm willing to sacrifice for it. And I did. I sacrificed my television career for this company, because every investor said, okay, but you're not going to carry on with the TV stuff, are you? In a way, that was a bit short-sighted, actually, because as we all know, a bigger platform helps you get a better CAC. But I was, if they wanted me to do that, I was willing. And I remember going in and saying, I've got this idea. And he said, I think I met someone who can design some app screens. And that was the end of the conversation. Woke up to an email in my inbox. And my brother's very efficient. He'd introduced me to a random guy that he'd met completely randomly, that he had learned, who built wireframes, just app designs. And I don't think I realized how valuable designers are, especially when you're building tech companies, because in apps in particular, pre-code, it's not expensive. Well, it's not as expensive as making mistakes with code. I think that there's no time like the present. You know, I call this guy up saying, let's meet this evening. And again, I think you need that kind of momentum when you're setting up a company. Every hour should be so valuable to you that you don't want to miss it. And so I met the guy. He didn't even care about his qualifications because I just said, can you design some app screens? He said, yes. I said, great, we're off. Again, I think you can waste time finding the right person for you. But I just knew I needed to get to my next step. And my next step was to show uncreative investors what this could look like in a physical form rather than just in my head explaining why it's important. So I remember we sat down for a day and I said, okay, and I'd done the research and I kind of knew what I wanted and I had drawn it out literally on the kind of a back of a napkin, that sort of vibe. And he created some really basic wireframes for me to then be able to show investors, if you clicked here, this is what the journey would be like. Again, once we'd raised an investment, my app eventually looked nothing like this first version.
Hopefully a little better.
A lot better. But the point was, I knew I had to get as far as I possibly could with my own money, which I had none of. I think this entire phase cost me £3,000.
£3,000?
Yeah.
Is that all you spent to get?
All I spent to get to the point where I could get investment. You know, I do think you can get very far on a small amount in the early days, especially when you're working with other young people that are passionate like you are. And then it was just a game of networking and just being obsessed on email and emailing every single person I possibly could, and also speaking to really unusual people you don't think could help you. And how it really ended up being was I was doing a TV show at the time and I started talking to my producer of the TV show and he said, well, I'll loan you the first 50,000 to be able to get you on your way. Brilliant. And then after that, my best friend in LA had a music manager who had just met a tech investor, and it was just through the most unlikely connections, because I don't believe that there's value in an idea. I tell everybody my ideas all the time because I think they're the give you good feedback, or they can introduce you to your next jigsaw puzzle piece. And I see building companies like Jigsaws, everybody's looking for a piece that they need to complete their jigsaw. So you need to tell everybody about your jigsaw in case they've got the secret piece that you're missing. And then they introduced me to my main investors, and then from that I'd raised the first $500,000, and after that I was able to raise, you know, a few million after that quite quickly based on the legitimacy my first investors had given me. And then suddenly the space started bubbling, but so it was kind of slow, and then it went quickly.
Wow. Okay. And so after you had that first investment, you launched your first product when was that into the market?
So this is when also it all went a bit wrong at the same time too. I raised investment. I raised it at terrible terms. And look, the market's not very good right now. So if anyone's trying to raise right now, I do think that people are taking less favorable terms than if you're raising maybe 2 years ago. So for first-time founders especially, I don't think you are in the seat of telling people exactly what you want to be investing on. But I invested on really terrible terms. And so these was when some of my mistakes started to show, and I started to pay for them years later.
Yeah, some funky structures. I don't know if you had it, but a lot of people don't see it, but you see deals get announced on, like, say, TechCrunch or wherever, and they don't realize what's underneath. So, like, they might take like $1, $2, $5, $10 million of investment, but then there's something called like liquidation preferences, and that's like, that means investors are guaranteed 2-3x money on whatever they put in. So for example, Snapchat was a famous story one time when it raised at $1 billion, but I think that money was taken at something like 3x liquidation preferences. So therefore, if an investor puts in 100 million, they are guaranteed $300 million.
Regardless.
Regardless. So it was like really messy terms. But what's happening right now is a lot of marketing is going on where they go, they've raised at this high valuation, but there's like sometimes dividends that they have to pay back. They've got to pay, like it's very, very structured. So there's a lot of horror stories, and obviously I know a lot of people that have had them, and it is tricky to navigate. I don't know if yours was as bad, but
it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad, and I remember.
Can you talk about exactly how bad, or is it?
It was,
not?
I remember one investor calling me up saying, because at this point I gave away 50% of my company on day one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. I was a female founder in 2015. They didn't exist. All of these podcasts, when we're talking about that, didn't exist. There was no guidebook. There was nothing out there.
You raised in the US or the UK or both?
Both. It was a UK company, but it was US investors. And then we ended up having a top company in the UK and then a subsidiary in the US. But I remember one investor, even when I had 50%, I remember one investor saying, you know, Poppy, we feel really uncomfortable with you having so much of the company.
Wow.
What?
And he said, he used the example, he said, well, the founder of, it was a YouTuber at the time, and she set up a company sending out samples.
Okay.
And he said, well, she only owns 5% of her company. So we feel all very uncomfortable with you owning 50%. So I suggest that you write to the board and tell everyone that you want to give me another 3%. And I remember being so shocked and not really knowing what to say because he was a really big voice on the board. And I think at the time I probably said, oh, okay, well, probably was just polite back. And afterwards, I thought it felt actually that was a bit unfair. I thought I've already given you 50% for not that much money, and you've already taken away so much control of my company, but okay. And basically, at the next board meeting, I hadn't given him the extra investment, hadn't given him the extra equity yet, and he screamed at me. And he's like, what have you done since the last meeting?
Yeah.
And I was just waiting for the tech to be built. There was nothing of course I was working every single day on it, but you can't. If the tech team said, this is the sprint, it's very difficult to speed them up. I mean, I was hysterically crying for 3 days afterwards.
Geez.
And the only reason he was so rude to me and screaming at me so much in this meeting is because I hadn't given him the equity. And I remember calling my parents saying, I'm just going to have to give him the equity because I can't live life like with him being like this to me. In a way, my life is going to be easier if I just give it to him. And my parents were like, that's ridiculous, Poppy. You shouldn't have to do this. You shouldn't have to do this. And I said, but at this point, I'm already in too far. I've already taken other investors who I really like, I really respect. I'd be now screwing over them if I left. I'm going to have to endure this. So this is my life. I just want to make it easier for myself. So I'm just going to give them the equity. And I did.
These stories happen and they're hidden. I'm so happy and appreciative that you're sharing it because, I've heard stories like this and hearing it from you. And I think the greed sometimes in investors, and this is sometimes what I do fear in the industry, is that there is this element of greed which is very scary and dangerous for everyone's mental health. And I get it. It's like basically a big pyramid scheme. What happens in investing is that they have to, like, these investors have got LPs underneath them. They've got a lot of pressure. So they're feeling pressure from them to deliver. So then sometimes I feel bad for these investors who are screaming and got their own mental health, and then they're taking it out on entrepreneurs sometimes. And there is this vicious selection of investors that, can create these situations which are just totally unfair and unneeded. And for you to have gone through that, it's sad. And I guess one of the hopeful items in this is that you did have this mental health experience, and I know you've even got your method on the flexible thinking. So was that stuff helping you? Because now all of the great things that you've learned on, like, through your journey, did you find those helping you in these tough times? Because it's really hard sometimes in life. Like, I know what to do, but this is one of the hardest moments. This is the big test. And how did you cope in that? And did those methods help you in?
Yeah, I mean, put it this way, I don't think anything I have been through has been as difficult as building a company. I almost would find that so ridiculous to say, because on the surface, how hard can it be? And I think the entrepreneur journey and I generally think mental health in the workplace, whether it's not your own company, you're just in a workplace, it's a hugely under-discussed topic, because I think we've become much better at talking about how our childhood has affected our mental health. But actually, adult mental health is hugely impacted by the environments they're in on a day-to-day basis, and often we're trapped in them. And again, that's a horrible word to use, trapped, and it's a horrible word to think that we are trapped in our jobs. But being brutally honest, we are. we've got mortgages to pay or rents to pay. So, it takes a lot of maneuvering to course correct, even to change jobs, or especially when you set up a company, you are in that company until one of two things. You get bored, or God forbid, you go bankrupt. Or you go public. They're your three realities.
Or you step aside.
But especially if you have investors that you really respect, which I did with Happy Not Perfect. I had people I truly loved, and maybe I took my fiduciary duty too seriously, but I was like, I'm going to get these I want to be successful for them. I want to be the right horse that they've backed. There's a lot of pressure you put on yourself, the environment you put in. And so the flexible thinking method that I write about in my book was life-saving. When I talk about mental health and things that have helped me, it has been the difference between me being in this seat and maybe not even being here. It was that bad at one point, It was the things that I prioritized, and I wrote about this in my book, but dancing in many ways saved my life. When I found this dance studio in New York where I was building the company, I remember going in and just bursting into tears for this entire class, because I think we forget how much we're hunched over a desk, and even if we're cycling, right, we're hunched over still. And it was the first class that kind of like opened my body up and, opened my chest and asked me to like raise my hands above my head. Actions that we do as children, and they suddenly get less and less and less as we go through our life. So connecting to my body was probably the biggest change in all of this.
So, Poppy, we talked about this flexible thinking method. I wonder if you can distill exactly what that means.
Flexible thinking is about learning to think bendy. And what I mean by that is, I once heard a quote by Marianne Williamson that said, "A miracle is just a shift in perspective." And often the grass can be so green, but we're so focused on the one tiny place in the garden that is rotten that we are unable to look around or change our perspective, change our mood. And so flexible thinking is a group of science-backed tools that uses behavioral science to CBT to ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, to be able to remold and rewire our brains so we have the power and the capacity to constantly relook, modify our response to the world. I often think that, we don't have sometimes a choice to be happy, but we have a choice to be kind to ourselves. And so it teaches you how to do that in a really easy 4-step method.
That's sick.
Awesome.
That's awesome. It's kind of unfashionable to say from a position of privilege or perceived privilege, because, we've all got jobs, we've all got income, we've all got platforms. And then like, if you start talking about flexible thinking on social media and in public domains, it's like, well, it's easy for you to say because you've got X, Y, Z. So yeah, like communicating it in a way that is compassionate, I think is something that you do really well.
Thank you so much. I think, when I developed the flexible thinking method, it was really, really in quite tricky times. And I was feeling really under pressure in every aspect of my life. And at the basis of flexible thinking is that it doesn't cost anything. To connect with our body, which is the first step, doesn't cost anything. To do 5-star jumps and go for a walk in the morning and to connect truly to how we feel, that is a skill and a step away from what we're used to doing, which is suppressing or distracting and pretending it's not really going on or ignoring the pain that we're feeling. Getting curious costs nothing. Just to ask, is this true? Is my inner critic true in what it's telling me? Or how can I look at this differently? Step 3 being compassion. Again, costs nothing to be kind to ourselves. And yet when we're kind to ourselves, as Dr. Rupy, you'll know very well, our whole body changes. The way that, our immune system is reacting to life. When we're kind to ourselves, we massively deregulate the nervous system so we can move into that rest and relax system. And when we're stressed, our brain isn't thinking properly. Again, I'm saying all these things that Dr. Rupy says on his podcast the whole time. Our prefrontal cortex will not be, and that's the problem-solving part of the brain, will not be activated in the way that it can be if we were able to move ourselves into a more relaxed state. So when we are stressed, if we know stress equals not the best decisions, and we include a little space, which is pause to connect, to get kind, and to focus on what actually matters in life, and then respond to life, we create a different reality for ourselves. That was the main point of flexible thinking, is to step away from reacting to life. And so when we are in tough times, when the economy, and we're reading the news and it just seems like the end of the world, we can stay in that state of alert, everything's going wrong, but it's not going to help us. We all have to learn to take a beat, to pause, and to make different decisions, because this is why I find the whole manifesting world a little bit like, you know, a little bit controversial, because what makes your future is the decisions you make in the present. Why are we not teaching ourselves to make better decisions in the present? Because I can guarantee that will create a different future, and a future you more want to live in. I think it's important to have friends that don't value you for what you do.
That's a good one. Yeah.
It's meeting up for dinner and realizing that you probably didn't speak about work once, but you were engaging in other things, whether it's the cinema or whether it's just having a joke, whether it's just letting your hair down in some way, shape or form, and them still loving you just as much afterwards.
It's interesting you're talking about like creating space in between yourself and the company. That's basically what I'm going through at the moment as well. I'm trying to create that divide between the doctor's kitchen and Dr. Rupy, and just Rupy, the person, the husband, the friend, the advisor that's outside of business related work. I find myself talking shop quite a bit, and I have to sort of schedule in time where I'm like, oh no, we're just going to go to the gym, or we're going to go climbing, or we're just going to go out for dinner, and not have to talk about work stuff, even though I really want to talk about work all the time. But yeah, that's super interesting.
It's hard, right? But I keep this attitude of like serving. So I'm here, like I separate from everything, and I'm just here to serve all of these people and projects. And that way I've kept my gap. So that's really helped me. So whenever I would think about like the investments, if an entrepreneur calls me, yes, I'm part of it, but I'll say, no, I'm there to serve them. Or, you know, whenever you call me up again, it's to serve my friends. So it's like, that's it. That's my hack to keep.
Yeah.
So I just feel like, you know, I'm there to support all of these, and none of them are mine. That was really hard though, because again, it was my identity, but that was the only way I could get out of it.
I fully agree with that. And then that also led me into trouble too.
Okay.
Because the whole reason I set up Happy Not Perfect was because I only did it out of service to other people's mental health. It was that I'm setting up this company. And so I actually killed myself because I just wanted to be in service. So when I was being bullied or when I was being terrorized, you know, I almost kind of started playing the martyr. Like, I'm going to take this because I am serving other people.
Yeah.
And that's probably what kept me going for so long, in all honesty, is being of service. But I learned almost going into spiritual flight. That is also an escapist tool. I actually had to come down from spiritual flight just to face my reality of what was huge wounds. And I needed just to nourish them and nurture them with just some of the basics. So I think it's like everything in moderation. It sounds like that really works for you.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the nature of the company, because it was around serving people with mental health, and and I was receiving so many messages every single day saying, this app has changed my life. This app has stopped me from committing suicide. I don't know what I've done without this app. And so even more and more and more, this element, I need to be in service. Their well-being is more important than mine. Like, it's okay if I suffer because other people are benefiting, and that's okay. And this is where I find studying Kabbalah really helpful, which is an ancient spirituality. It's an ancient form of Judaism for the last 10 years. And I have a teacher called Marcus who always tells me to lean into what I find most uncomfortable. I find it more comfortable being in service, being a martyr. I find that easy, actually. To me, that's an easy way to live life.
Classic people pleaser.
Classic people pleaser.
Yeah.
So for me to kind of move into what I find uncomfortable is, how do I look after myself today? Actually, what is right? Because at the end of the day, otherwise I'll just fall into burnout and then I can't help anyone.
You do get to this point where you're right. I just got this strategy is good, but you can get really overwhelmed because once you do start serving, everyone starts coming to you for more and more, and you're just like, exactly like yours, and suddenly the bottle's just so filled up and you'll just get overwhelmed. And then that boundary is just, you have to really figure out what that is, that defense. Otherwise, it's like a tidal wave just comes at you. So how did you set the boundary of, hey, look, this is the people I can help and this is what I can do, because you want to try and maximize to help, but you need to protect yourself. So how did you manage that piece?
I think it's like getting into that rhythm with yourself.
Yeah.
And there is almost like no formula for kind of knowing what feels right. Because it's that kind of weird spirituality, gooey, fluffy space that we can't quantify in many ways. I can't say to myself, I'm going to do 10 today or 20 messages only, because sometimes I'd have energy for 5, sometimes I'd energy for 55. So another person who I think speaks really well to, really accurately to this is a girl called Jenna Zoe, who really focuses on human design. And one of her main messages is what comes easy to you in life. And that is your sacred gift. And I guess with entrepreneurship as well, I think it's really easy to build a company that you absolutely love, and then you end up doing the jobs that actually are not aligned with your sacred gift. Do you know what I mean? You're suddenly you're a creative, and then you're just stuck in admin.
Yeah.
And after a while, you get really drained, and you're like, God, why is this not as fun anymore?
There's a whole suite of tools that you've already taught us today on this podcast about how to be a better and happier entrepreneur. One of the things I want to talk about is a bit more about the shop side of things. So when you started, you raised the investment, you got the app, and then you mentioned an inflection point as to when things really ramped up and just went crazy and, millions of downloads and whatever. How far had you been going along at that point? And what actually led to that sort of exponential growth?
Well, I think the exponential growth really came when we pivoted to also servicing B2B. And suddenly we found this incredible B2B partnership that then ensured that the app was suddenly available to 100 million teachers, parents and students.
Yeah, wow.
And that's when it was this idea I'd woken up in the middle of the night with, to suddenly 5 years later, we were exposed to as just more people possibly even think.
And bigger deals, right?
Yeah, it was huge. And that's where I really saw the power of B2B actually in combining communities. And how that deal came about, again, was really serendipitously. It was certainly not in front of a laptop, just firing off emails. I was launching Pop Suki in Shanghai, and my investors at the time were not happy about it because they thought that this meant that I wasn't completely focused on Happy Not Perfect. But being out in the world is some of the most valuable thing that you can do for your business. And I always think pounding the streets, whether that just be going to industry events or just being out there talking about your idea, that is when serendipity can happen. Serendipity is very difficult to happen when you're at home. And I remember being in Shanghai and I met a guy and he said, what do you do? I said, I do Pop Suki, but I've just launched a tech company that focuses on mental health. And he said, you should meet this guy. I set up a meeting. Suddenly within 3 days, I was flying to Canada to meet the CEO to start the negotiations for this deal.
Wow, that's quick.
And well, I know it was, but it was, do you create your luck or is it lucky? I don't know, but it was a lucky moment and I couldn't have planned it.
When you look back on the last few years of the company and stuff, you just announced the acquisition as well. Do you look back on it with sort of positive energy now? Or are you still sort of healing from the wounds of having to deal with the trauma associated with starting the company in the first place?
I really look back on it with positive energy. Going back there, I haven't, after just sharing with you some of the things that happened, it even brings me back because in all honesty, I was learning so quickly. And I can't also blame it all on these investors. I was a very young, deeply inexperienced entrepreneur. Me now, I wouldn't have even let that happen. I would have put the boundaries in place. I would have formed a relationship that was appropriate and acceptable. So I'm going to take some of the blame here. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sit here and say I was probably a nightmare to have invested in, and I knew what my idea was and I wanted it to do it my way. I definitely had some learning curves that I shouldn't have done probably. So it got to the middle and actually towards the end of the company, everybody had suddenly relaxed because at this point, and don't get me wrong, I hardly owned anything of the company at the time of kind of acquisition. So it's not like my life has changed. But it wasn't about the equity for me at the end. Happy Not Perfect, to a point of being in service. Happy Not Perfect was bringing something to the world that I really thought needed to be in the world. For me, I do look back and think, wow, that was an amazing life experience. And it made me reevaluate what success means. I think in our culture, we can think success is only big house, big paycheck, whereas success has never really, truly been that for me. It was, I set it up with impact in mind, and I sold with huge impact in mind. That was a success.
I remember when we had coffee and you told me about the acquisition. I was like, "Oh my god, that's incredible!" I remember
you've won.
Yeah, no, I was like, "You won!" But not just from the acquisition part, side of things, but truly from what you just said, the impact that you're having, the millions of people that are going to be using this app, and how it's going to grow. Now it's in the hands of another company, and the exposure that it's going to get. And it started from that little idea that you woke your brother up with, at 10 p.m. And I if someone woke me up at 10 p.m, I'd be annoyed. I'm on your brother's page here. I go to bed at 9. But that's incredible. Would you do it again? Are you?
Yeah, I'm back already with my next
number
company.
2.
Yeah.
Is it number 2? No,
Number three. Yeah, I'm back with my next company. And I think to myself, God, this feels quite masochistic, kind of like going back in. I've just told everyone, like, being an entrepreneur is really hard.
Right? You're going into the arena with like a black belt.
Going in. But, even the fact that I'm sitting in front of 2 entrepreneurs now, I love the community of entrepreneurs. My dad is an entrepreneur. I just think it is a privilege to be able to create something that wasn't in the world, before you came along. And, I remember when I was little, my dad invented, him and his business partner invented the cling film cutter.
Oh, wow.
No
The biodegradable cling film cutter. Yeah.
That's amazing.
We were taught to invent, it was, if you want something, go build it. And yes, it's another up and down road, but if you can look after your mental health religiously, I think we can all do it. I think it's, and as I said, it's a privilege. So I'm back building, but I did take some time to heal.
So what are you working on now? Can you talk about it? Or
Yes, I'm building a company all around sleep health. And the reason I'm doing that is because obviously having, since 2014 now, 8 years, having studied mental health and the approaches to mental health for 8 years, I've realized that in many ways, I think we're too late in our interventional process. We are waiting until we get really stressed out to then start meditating or whatever intervention you want, any tool you're going to use. But I thought, well, how do we stop people getting to that point? How can I intervene at higher up the stream? And that's why I got obsessed with sleep health, because as we all know, if you sleep better, you've got better relationships, more productivity, better health. It, to me, is like the golden bullet of being human is getting better sleep. And clearly, Dr. Rupy, you are the king of this.
Okay, so right now, what's the process? You in the fundraising or like products made? Okay.
Fundraising, yeah.
Okay.
And I think, hopefully
Should
we'll
bring a
finish
sample for
fundraising.
us?
By the end of the
sample?
week.
Okay.
by the end of the week, there you
fine.
go. So fundraising. So you start the company, EIS, SEIS. I'm assuming, and then you're just going to go. Are you going to go direct to some initial investors? You're going to go crowdfund, or is it going to be a blend?
Going to investors that I've worked with before who I really love. So going back to some of people that I really, really trust. And I found an amazing co-founder.
Oh, amazing.
Which I am so excited about. I think that's my other big piece of advice is co-founders are great when they're great. At the time, I didn't have that many friends who was doing similar things. And so I think, talk about my mum to full circle. She was almost this, this co-founder in many ways, and she was a psychotherapist, so I could call her up and actually talk to her about the mental health content to actually just complete moral support. But in this new business, Cuddle, I have an amazing co-founder.
How'd you guys meet?
when he was doing his past business in CPG, he's been in CPG for 10 years.
Okay.
Worked at Heinz, baked beans, to Vita
cool.
Coca Water,
Yeah.
set up his own fizzy drinks company.
Oh, he's on a startup as well.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah.
Scaled it in America. I mean,
Yeah.
he was one of the best founders I had met in like 8 years. And when I was in New York and he was in New York too, we met up because we had a mutual investor and they put us in contact. And I honestly think both of us must have been in tears in our first meeting, like kind of sharing the struggle.
Really? Right.
And so we just instantly had this bond. And what's so strange is I've been waiting for him to finish. And anyway, so I reached out to him because I saw on his LinkedIn status it had changed, like new job or something. And I thought, is he
Now this
available?
time.
Is he out of a relationship?
Yeah.
And I messaged him and I said, would you want to collaborate on something? And he responds being like, yeah, what are you thinking? And I said, well, I'm really interested in working in the sleep space because I'm obsessed with sleep health. And he said, this is so odd. And he sends me a picture and it's an entire A4 sheet of paper that says sleep recovery. And there's an arrow and it says Poppy Jamie.
No.
way.
Yes.
What?
Oh.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's a goosebump moment, wasn't it?
That's
Yeah.
incredible.
So I am a great believer in, this is why I think serendipity. I do believe that, I guess this is where my spirituality comes in. And actually that also helps me to deal with stress, is I do kind of like, to use this word tentatively, however you use it, but I give up to God, you give it up to the universe. I put something into motion. And you know, like either something goes quite naturally and suddenly these serendipitous moments happen, or, this is not my first idea after Happy Not Perfect. I've come up with 5 others. I was going to build a community therapy app called Heartful last October. And it was all going to be about group therapy, but it was sticky, built the deck, had a first investment meeting, and it just didn't go. And so I know what it feels like when the world is showing you signs that this is not right for you, and when the world is kind of giving you a bit of a kind of push forward. And this was a push forward sign to me when he sent me back that piece of paper.